name's Nelson Green, Albert Nelson Green, but I go by Nelson. My dad was Albert. And presently, I don't have a barn because I sold mine a number of years ago, and I work horses out of the stable that actually belongs to Melinda Moore called Arrowhead, and Robert Gardner leases it from her, and I board horses with Robert Gardner, and that's in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. I live in Nicholasville, Kentucky, where I lived when I had my own stables. It was called Nelson Green Stables. I had that for about 25 years. I'm originally from South Carolina. My granddad, my mother's father, was a farmer, a horse and mule trader, dealer, cattle trader, dealer, and I just was crazy about him, and I spent every waking moment I could around him. I had a lot of fun, just watching. He was an amazing trader and a real straight up guy on top of it. And so I just got interested in horses and being around him. And there was a stockyards he would haul horses and cattle to. The vet at the stockyards name was Herbert Riddle. Herbert Riddle's son is Thomas Riddle of Rood and Riddle here in Lexington. But Herbert Riddle owned Cleveland Park Stables in Greenville, South Carolina. And through that, getting to know him, and through that connection, I went to work at Cleveland Park Stables when I was about 18 years old. As a kid, I had learned how to ride. My dad he liked to move around a lot, and we moved to Columbia, South Carolina. And because I'd been introduced to horses through my granddad, I wanted to get to be around horses when we moved to Columbia. And I was a lot more comfortable around horses than I was people. I was terribly timid and shy around people, but I was in a comfort zone around animals. And so we found a stable there in Columbia, and a lady named Miriam Height ran the stables. And she was an old school, real strict riding instructor, taught at several different colleges and that sort of thing over the years. And I made an arrangement with her that she picked me up at school every day after school. I went out to the stables and I'd work till the stables closed for no pay or wage, other than to get to ride in a riding class one of her riding classes, and if there was a vacancy in two of them, I'd ride in two of them that day, if I had my chores done. So that's how I learned how to ride, with her. And she was a tough instructor. She never had what would have been today's show riders, but she just taught riding, and in part of the riding, you'd sit there during the class and you had to name all the different parts of the horse and the different parts of the bridle and the different parts of the saddle, and you had to learn how to clean up a horse and clean your tack and that sort of thing. So I had that foundation before I went to Cleveland Park Stables to work, but that's how I got started. I got a lot of role models, but my mentor, and so who would be my biggest role model, was Tom Moore. I was down there in the Carolinas and at Cleveland Park. That moved over into another job, a private job in the Carolinas, a place called Mary Lane Farms, and it was a private job. This man built a brand new barn, and he just wanted horses for his wife and his daughter to ride and show on that South Carolina circuit. But when I was at Cleveland Park, the man that I was working for was a horse trader, and he would come up to Tattersalls every year and buy every sale. Actually, there were 3 sales a year at that time. The biggest one was in July, the same time as this Junior League Horse Show that's getting ready to start tomorrow. And I was there. He'd just go to the sale, and I would walk over to watch the horse show at night, and I saw Tom Moore ride the Contender, and I thought, boy, something just clicked. I said, I'd love to know how you would approach doing something like that. And so after I got down to Mary Lane Farms, Tom Moore's assistant, the word got out, was leaving and going to South Africa on a job. And I got in touch with him and asked him if there'd be any possibility, that they'd consider me for the job. And so I quit a good paying private job that furnished me a house and everything else, and went up to work for Tom for a fraction of what the money I was making, but that's what I was wanting to learn something. I worked for him for about 5 years. I moved. He was in Richmond, Illinois then at Nolan Farm, and then he left there and moved here to Lexington. And it was called, at that time, called Grape Tree Farm. That's the same place where Diamond View is today. And I moved to Kentucky with him when he came down. In fact, they sent me down here before they ever moved. I was down here for probably 6 months before everything from Nolan Farm moved down here. But he was just a great mentor. He's a great guy to work for. I mean, he just, obviously I never learned how to ride or show a horse like he could, but I learned all the other things that he could do that I could try to emulate. You know, he took the best of care of them. He was a great stable manager. He was good. You know, he was a good instructor. He just knew he was way ahead of his time. That's all there was to it. He set the standards, and that's why, you know, the UPHA is, you know, it has the Tom Moore Hall of Fame. He was the founding father of the UPHA. That was his idea to do that. You know, that we needed a professional association. He was just, you know, he just thought out of the box. It was amazing because, you know, he's a guy that didn't have a lot of formal education, but he was really smart about business, about horses, about training horses, about the direction the horse business needed to try to go in. So he would have been my biggest role model. I was working for Tom. He and Donna were married. Were married at that time. Melissa and Melinda were just young kids when I went to work for them. Melissa hadn't even started school yet, and Melinda was just, you know, maybe second or third grade. So that's how long I've known him. But things were kind of getting rocky there between Tom and Donna, and I had several job offers while I was with him, and a family from down in Norfolk, Virginia, had been in touch with me several times, wanting to hire me, but they wanted to build a stable down in Virginia Beach, and so I contacted them and told them that I had no interest in moving to Virginia or Virginia Beach, but that if he was interested in buying a farm out here, I would, you know, I'd be glad to talk to him about, you know, going to work. And he said that he would, and he said, find something that you think, you know, would work. And so I got to looking around at property out here. Tommy Glenn, who's Kit Glenn's brother-in-law, she was married to his brother. He was at Fennels at the time, and I gotten to know him through Fennels. And he was selling real estate also, and he told me about a farm outside of Frankfurt. I went over there and looked at it, and it was a thoroughbred place, but it looked like it would work. And I called this guy up to put him in touch with Tommy Glenn, and he bought the place over the telephone, sight unseen. And I went to the airport and picked him up, and on our way to the farm, he stopped by the bank and closed on the farm. And then we went out and looked at the farm. And I worked there for several years and would have stayed there longer. I really got things going. I got connected with a man named Chubby Bridgers from down in the Carolinas. He owned a horse called Status Symbol, breeding stallion. We had him over there, had in excess of 100 brood mares on the place, and had converted what was a thoroughbred barn into a big training stable, and I was running, you know, keeping horses for other people. And a darn tornado hit the place and just absolutely just wiped it out. And that was a real dramatic experience, frankly, because I mean, I was in the basement of the house looking out a garage door, because it had a garage door that accessed the basement, and saw horses flying over the roof of the barn. And we found brood mares 5 miles away. It was just in shambles. And I sent status symbol and the brood mares, once we got it all gathered together, over to Donnie Brookshire. He had just gone in business over in Georgetown and had a farm over there. He took them over there. And the week of this horse show again, Mr. Campbell came to town. And in all of this chaos, that was in early April, in all of this chaos, I had failed to get my entries in on time to the Junior League Horse Show. Took them down to the Junior League office and laid them on the desk, and they were opening entry envelopes, but mine wasn't postmarked by the entry date, and they wouldn't take it. And Mr. Campbell got real upset about that. He wanted his daughter to be able to show the horse show, and we kind of came to odds. And so that was the end of my job there at Hollywood Farm. He never hired anybody else. I went back and went to work for Donna Moore, and stayed there with her for a while. She got me to take a private job down in North Carolina at a place called Fashion Acres, belonged to the Sigmund family. It was a private job. But I got down there, and within 3 months I was wanting to come back to Kentucky, and did. Then I was at Donnie's. This is right, I didn't come back to Donnie's. I was at Donnie's, and I took a horse on consignment, a gaited horse on consignment to sell, and we were doing all kind of horse trading, anything you could to make it. And this, from down in North Carolina, a guy named Johnny Payne had him, and I thought he owned the horse. And I showed the horse at the Junior League Horse Show and won the gelding class with him. His name was Contracts Tinker Toy, and he was about as hard a knocking horse as there was. He wasn't very pretty, but boy, he could grind up. And got on a workout in the stake and was second in the stake. And we were back there cooling the horse out, and this lady walked up and leaned up against an open stall door and was looking at the horse, and I said, "Can I help you?" And she said, "Well, I guess you can, that's my horse." And I mean, I had no idea. And so I tried to kind of just figure out what it could do. And I said, "Well, congratulations, he's been good," and all that kind of stuff. I'd never met her before. Anyway, make a long story short, she gave me a week to get him sold, and she was going to take him back. And Bob Vessel was working down at Happy Valley. And I called Bob, and I said, "I need to sell this horse right. I need to sell him now." And so he got Mr. Hutchison to buy him at Happy Valley. And then Bob took the job for Cynthia Woods in California. And when he left took the job to go to California, Mr. Hutchison hired me to come down to Happy Valley. And I was down there for 14 years. And that horse was there, and I showed him for years, and Did Hutchison showed him, and he was a hard knocking horse. He could handle any of them today. Because I was showing him in the era of Imperator and those kind of horses. He just didn't have the quality to beat those horses. And then I left Happy Valley, and then I was unceremoniously fired at Happy Valley after I'd been there for 13 and a half years. She wanted to run it herself. And I had a real good assistant down there, and he and I are still good friends. Eddie Womble, the black guy in this town. Well, she fired him too. Before it was over with, and he'd been there for 40 years. And because her mother, they had a cook down there named Edward Little, and he was there before Bit's mother was on the place. And she fired him because he took a can of peas out of the kitchen home with him. And because I always told Eddie B, "Don't you ever forget Edward Little now." I just saw him here a couple of weeks ago. I went down to that show in Cleveland, Tennessee, and Eddie B got put in the UPHA Hall of Fame. And we were talking about that then, because he said, "You always told me to never forget Edward." I said, "Yeah." I came up here and rented a barn on Harrisburg Road that Paul Turner owned, and I stayed in that. And then he evicted me because I judged the elections and the horse show. This election and horse shows caused me a lot of problems. I judged the election and horse show, and they had a yearling in-hand class at Lexington. I'm one of 3 judges, and Dr. Scott was rolling then, and Dr. Scott's horses were 1st through 10th, and his horse didn't get a ribbon, so he evicted me. And I mean, just wrote me a letter. And he lived next door to the barn, you know, he saw me every day when I'd come in and out of there. He'd have to, I went over and rented, Jimmy Robertson had an old barn over there close to his dad's, and it was sitting there empty. And so we moved over there. At this time, Smith was working for me, and we moved everything over to Jimmy Robertson's. But anyway, I stayed there until I could figure out something to do, and then I bought that place where I was and moved back over there. And it's basically, well, you can see Paul Turner's barn that I got evicted from it. You know, they just back almost joined. And then I stayed there until I've had to move around a lot. And then I sold it, and now I've moved 4 times since then. And I just work 5 or 6 horses, but you know, if people need their space and that kind of, because I'm just bored horses there.
Right.
And I'm usually pretty much done before wherever I've been get started.
Right.
Because I still get up and go to work like I had, you know, a whole barn full of horses to work. It was, my biggest accomplishment has been to make a living doing something that I really love doing, because I've never considered it as a job, because it's a passion that I have. I like to work with a horse, and so I feel real fortunate that I've been able to do that, because that's all I've ever done since I was a teenager. That's all. I've never had any other kind of job, and so I consider that an accomplishment. I've had, you know, of course, over this time span, a lot of horses challenging in different ways. It hasn't always been successful, that's for sure. I've got one right now that's about as athletic horse as I've ever had, and I haven't been able to get him yet, and I've been messing with him for a year, and he's so athletic that I keep thinking if I ever get it, I don't know what else to do with him. I can't sell him, you know, unless I just wanted to give him away. I don't want to turn him out. He ain't gonna get any better that way. But I've had some horses that it did turn out well. I bought a horse when I was at Happy Valley. I was talking to Lonnie Lavery on the phone, and I just asked him if he had seen anything. He said, "Yeah, there's a gaited horse up here that Walt Trot Thomas has," and he says, he's a curious looking horse. So I caught a plane and flew up to Cleveland and went out and looked at him. And there's Lonnie and Renee, Tom Farabee, trying to think. There's several of them went with me out there that day. I can remember it plain as day. It was a thermometer on the wall, and it had 12 degrees on it. That barn didn't have any heat in it, and it was a dead of winter. It was freezing cold in there. This horse had hair on him like a goat, and his ears weren't trimmed, which you wouldn't want to trim them, you know, because it'd freeze and everything. You couldn't tell anything about him, his condition or anything. And he just rode him up and down that little hallway in his barn. The ground was frozen and everything. But you could tell something about him, you know, might be special. And I didn't have anybody to really buy a horse, so I got back back home, back down to Happy Valley. And I was keeping customer horses there. So I just got to thinking, this might be a good adventure for them to get together and buy a horse. And so I just got them each, we just split him up. And I said, I don't want a commission or anything on him. and I said, I just want a commission on him when we sell him. And they thought about it and said, well, that's not quite right. What about if we just gave you a double commission on him when we sold him? I said, that's more than generous, that's fair with me. And we got this horse down there, and his name was Final Command or something like that. And so we named him Valley Venture and had his name changed. And he was a flat, cool horse, but now he was just really, really, really edgy. And I used to say he could hear a gnat fart. This son of a gun was quick. And I hauled him around with me to all the shows that we went to, and just gradually got him used to being around things going on and whatever. And the sight sounds, because by this time he's 5, he still hadn't been shown. And but no, he was a blast. And about the time I finally got all of that figured out, because he was a head case. Training horses just getting into their head, and it was hard to get into his. I couldn't do it today. I couldn't begin to. I'm too old. Back at that time, I'm athletic enough I could kind of deal with him, and I'd work him twice a day, maybe do a little something to him. Sometimes I'd do him 3 times a day, just to take the time to do him, and just finally kind of won him over. And he was a fun horse. Second in the stake at Louisville with him, and stuff like that. And then I don't know where he picked it up, but this horse's eyes started weeping. And I had put him in a clinic. I sent him to the University of Tennessee, and he had developed a fungus called aspergillus and lost his eye. And at this time, I don't mean lost sight in the eye. They had to take his eye out, had to remove it, and they put a prosthesis in there, just a blank prosthesis. And I didn't know what we were going to do with him, because they would put all this time and effort into it. And at that time, you couldn't show a horse with one eye legally. I had a horse prior to him called Enlightening that was really a nice gaited horse, and I don't mind telling you, he lost sight in his eye, and his eye turned white. And I had a contact made that was painted, and I put that contact in him, and I showed him, and nobody ever knew it. Now I can tell it now, but we couldn't do that with this horse. The group of us had got us an attorney to represent us, and we went to work with, at that time it was American Horse Show Association, which is USIF now, and finally got the rule changed where a horse had to have appearance of sight. And we had a prosthesis made that was painted that you couldn't tell one eye from the other. And when he showed, we would put that one in him. But at home, he wore a blank one, because these things were real expensive, and if a horse just rubbed his head against the wall and scratched it or something like that, it'd ruin it. But, and then we ended up selling him to, John Knatzer bought him for really, really good riding. The juvenile at that time her name was, her name was Catherine, they called her Khaki Lachlan, from down in Wilmington, North Carolina. And they trimmed him, because even though he got, once he got where he couldn't see out of this one side, it was pretty hard to ride him, at a horse show, because he just heard everything, and he was just so quick. But they trimmed him, and he won multiple classes at Louisville. Elizabeth Goff ended up with him. She won multiple classes all over the country with him. But he was a challenging horse. I had one other filly that was just flat, tough, mean, nasty, and her name was Fashionista, and she belonged to Scott Hagan, and she was a full sister to Heads Up. And because I'd sold Scott Hagan years ago before that, the dam of all of those horses, a mare named Daydream Believer. And she was pretty tough too. Fashionista got all of those characteristics, but I just messed with her long enough. All he wanted to do was win a class with her at Louisville. She won the 3-year-old harness class at Louisville, and then since then she's been in his broodmare band. But those two horses are about as difficult horses as I've ever fooled with, in different ways. I'll tell you a funny story, only because we were talking in the barn the other day about a guy that used to be a buddy of mine. This was a long time ago. There's a good North Carolina horseman that's no longer alive. His name was Johnny Lucas Jr. And this guy was real big, and he could ride a horse as light as anybody ever seen. I bought Carolina Cat from him, years later after this story happened, because he made Carolina Cat. I just bought a nice horse, and all the work had been done other than take care of him, keep him going. But I'd gotten this. I'd known him since I was a kid. And when I got this job at Mary Lane Farms, when I was just first getting started, Johnny and I got to know each other pretty good. And he not only was a good horseman and trainer, but he loved the horse trade. He'd swap, trade, do whatever, he just loved it. And he pulled in the barn one day in his old raggedy van, and he said, "Come here, I want to show you something." And he dropped it wasn't a ramp, he dropped the tailgate on the van truck. And he got this pretty little chestnut mare off the truck, and he said, "You down here, you got this job now." My son was already born, and I had him a little Shetland pony. He said, "You need to get him something to ride." And I said, I don't know if I can afford to buy something to ride right now. He said, "No, you can." He said, "You need to have this." And he said, "This mare's got papers and everything. She's registered." And he jumped up on her in a halter and the lead shank, bareback, rode her up and down the driveway. And she just kind of racket along, single pace along. Said, "You have a lot of fun with this mare." So I bought her. And he went off and left. And so I talked to him on the phone several times after that. How your boy liking that mare? How you liking her? I said, "Like her." I said, "When you going to get me the papers?" "Don't worry about it, I'll get them for you." And this went on for a little while and went on for a little while. One day he drove back in there again, and we were talking. And I said, "By the way, Johnny, did you ever get me papers on that mare?" "Forgot all about it." "Yeah, I got them in the truck." So he went and got in his truck, and he came out with this set of papers, and he handed them to me. And she was registered. She was a registered Tennessee walking horse. And he says, "I wouldn't know, he's saying a whole lot of these papers. I don't know if this man would think much of you coming down here on this job. You can't tell a Tennessee walking horse from an American saddlebred." And he laughed and hooted, and we had fun for years after that.
If you could go back and give your 20-year-old self advice, what would that be?
That is an easy question. I regret not having gotten an education. And I think it's real important if you're going to be a horse trainer that wants to be successful is also a businessman, and you're dealing with business people and people who've been successful. And I've often felt like I fell short, not having a better background. I was always in a hurry to grow up, I'm telling you things about what I did when I was 17 and 18 years old, I've got a son. He was born when I was 17 years old, and he's a great guy. He got a good education, and he has a terrific job and a family and everything else. But I missed all that, and that's if I had it to do over again, which none of us get to do it over again, I wouldn't. I know that part I would have done differently if at all possible. My dad was very educated, and it depends on how you judge success. My dad, he never was financially successful, but he was a real successful person, you know. My granddad, on the other hand, he didn't have a sixth grade education, and he was real successful. He was real successful, financially and in other areas, and a good person. But at the same time, I used to go out with him when he was buying cattle, and out of the field. He'd go out and buy. If farmers wanting to sell out or something, had 100 head of cows or 15 or whatever it was, and he'd take a little spiral notebook out of his shirt pocket and a number 2 lead pencil, and he'd sit there and scratch and whatever, and he could tell you, what 50 head of cows all total together were going to weigh, and he knew about what the market was, and when I was just a kid, before I had a driver's license, I'd go drive over to the fellow's place and start loading cattle and taking them to the auction house, and that's how he made money.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't understand. There's a lot of ways to be successful other than making money. That's for damn sure. He couldn't sit here and talk, about anything in the world that was going on, or about politics, in different cultures, different things like that. You just don't have. You just didn't have that kind of background, and I'm a little bit that way myself. Thank goodness, my savings grace is Josie. I'd be the first to admit that, because, she's just smart as a whip, and reads all the time. She tells me what's going on all the time. I know one thing, when I had jobs, I used to get to travel and stuff more. That's one thing people need to think about. That when you work for yourself, you better be ready to work. And that's the best. When I was working for Tom down here, then it was called Grape Tree, and we'd work Sundays, and nobody else in Kentucky worked Sundays at that time. Up in Chicago area where we moved from, everybody worked Sunday. You took Monday off, and Mr. Bradshaw, Garland Bradshaw, sometimes would stop by there on a Sunday just to visit, and he'd always be dressed like he was going to church, or had been, and whatever. And I don't know, for some reason he was real good, nice to me, and he told me he always wanted to tell me some kind of little. He called them Sunday school jokes, some joke you could say, tell in any company and whatever. And he had this squeaky voice everybody tried to imitate. And he walked up to me one morning and said, "How you doing today, Sonny?" "Sonny?" And I said, "I'm fine." He said, "Do you know what the best fertilizer for a fellow's farm is?" And I was sitting there thinking, what the hell could it be? What kind of fertilizer? Liquid nitrogen? What else would you put on? "No, sir, I don't know." "The owner's footsteps." I don't see how in the coming future anybody's going to be able to make business, running the horse business, if they don't have some kind of teaching program going on. Just to train horses, they might be a handful, but that's just real unique. I never had a riding program, but I came along in a little different era, and I had a little different niche in the business too. But you got to have a riding program if you want to cultivate a business and have them coming on.
And what is the biggest light bulb moment that you've had when working a horse?
That's the hardest question. I guess the one thing I have come to realize when you get your head up against the wall of the horse is don't let your ego or your temper, either one, get involved in what you're doing, because sometimes you know, you aren't going to win every time. And you can do more harm than you can do good. You know, everybody doesn't get along with every horse. Now you're fooling yourself if you think you can. I know damn, I've proven it to myself. And I'll send one somewhere else and if I don't think I'm getting anything done with it. And people send them to me that they aren't getting along with. But that's a light bulb thing now. If you want to, it's a little hard to accept, you know, sometimes. But it's only the truth.